Last time we talked about data types. So the data types, there were 4 specific categories that I touched on. First one was a text type. We call it a string, but it's formally written as str. There's numeric types. There are 3 types of numeric types. So there's the int, which is short for integer, float. We'll get into like more details for each of these, but there's also complex. But complex we won't be using in this class. We'll only be using int and float. As for the sequence types, there's 3: list, tuple, and range. We will be using list and range, but we won't really be using a tuple. There's a lot of restrictions that come with tuples, which is the reason why we're just gonna ignore tuples. And then finally, we have the Boolean type. There's only one, and that's the bool. That one you'll be using a lot. We will be going into more detail with especially the int and the float. So we'll go ahead and get started with more specific definitions. The first one being the string. So a string, abbreviated as str, and we're going to be using str in Python, are an immutable sequence of characters. Immutable means that you cannot change it. Once you've created your string, that's it. You cannot change it. You can't replace a letter through brute force. We'll talk about methods eventually that will allow you to circumvent the issue of not being able to change a certain string. The text value, so the string that you want the variable to be equal to, will be defined with quotation marks. You could use double quotation marks, and then you could use single quotation marks, or like apostrophe, I guess. A float can express decimals. Decimals being like 1.0. So right here, this is 3 point. Yes, 3 is a whole number. Yes, 1.0 is a whole number. A lot of you might not know what an imaginary number is, depending on what math you're taking. So we're not going to be going into complex numbers. Just know that it exists. Now we have the sequence types. The first one is a list, which is an ordered, changeable collection of values. So notice the difference between a list and a tuple. As a tuple is an ordered immutable. We had seen the word immutable already before when we were talking about strings. Strings are an immutable sequence of characters. Immutable meaning you cannot change it once you've defined it. So the difference between a list and a tuple is literally the fact in a list, once you've created your list, you could go back in and alter it however you'd like. Whereas for a tuple, you're unable to do that. So there's less flexibility. We will learn about tuples, but we will try not to put focus on it. We're definitely going to focus on lists a bit more just because there's more flexibility. And range. Range is a sequence of numbers defined by the user. So we'll be using range a lot actually. So just be excited for that. Let's go into a little bit more detail about each of the sequence types. The first one is a list. So you use brackets to create a list. Right here, this is our list. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you've already have some kind of programming knowledge, you guys might be looking at this, we're like, oh my God, like how dare you? There's text and numbers in one list. If you've learned like C++ or Java, you'll know that this is not good. Like you cannot have multiple data types. For Python, that's not the case. You can have integers, you could have floats, you can have strings all in one list. And to create a list, you would use brackets. When Python sees the brackets, it understands that you're trying to make a list, not curly braces or other symbols that you might have used from different programming languages, but you will definitely. For a tuple, however, you use parentheses. So this isn't a tuple, just the symbols that you have. So using the parentheses, it's like, oh, this is a tuple. That means this is immutable. And if you try to go back in and try to alter things, you're going to get an error. And finally, range. So range will be the sequence of numbers. So when I say range 0 to 6, it'll give me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Notice that the 6 is missing, however. So the first number is inclusive, the second number is not inclusive. So it will go up to, but not include the last number. And finally, we have our Boolean type. Lowercase t true or lowercase f false. You're probably going to get an error. Let's go ahead and try a really quick exercise. Is this first, so we have 4.0, so, and I assigned it as an integer. Is this right or is this wrong? What should the type be instead? Float, right? So this one is wrong. I'm gonna try to write, and this should be a float instead. Right, I'm writing with my trackpad, and I'm doing my best. Floats. Hopefully you guys will see that. How about the next one? We have just regular 5, and I assigned that as an integer. Is that right or is that wrong? It's correct, right? 5 is a whole number, and there's no decimals being thrown in the mix, so we are good. Now we have A in single quotation marks, and I said that's a string. Is that right or is that wrong? It's correct, right? Remember, I know like some of you guys, if you've taken a different coding class in like C++ or like, you know, like there's like distinction between single quotation marks and double quotation marks, but that's not the case for Python. Single quotation marks, double quotation marks. If you've taken JavaScript, you should already know this as well. They're both strings. So the second one, ABC in quotation marks, is that correct or is that incorrect? It's right. Good. So this is also a string. The next one, 5 point. I said it's a float. Is that correct or is that incorrect? Good, it's right. Because of that decimal right there, it is now considered a float instead of an integer, even though 5 is a whole number. So this is good. How about 5? Just 5 by itself. Is that a string? Very good. This is incorrect. There's a lack of quotation marks. So that means it's not a string, but instead an int. I-N-T. All right, the next one, 5.0 in quotation marks. Is it a float? Right, it's not a float. What should it be instead? STR. Once you have the quotation marks, even though 5.0 is a number, once it's surrounded by quotation marks, it's no longer going to be interpreted as a number. Rather, it's going to be interpreted as a string, as text. So this is bad. This should be STR. And then finally, the last one. We have 5 in single quotation marks. Is it STR? Right, it's correct because you have the quotation marks. Regardless if it was single quotation marks or double quotation marks, because there's a presence of quotation marks, it's automatically going to be a string. So we're good. I will be assigning you guys homework. Your homework will look something like this. So with that being said, we're just going to talk about our next topic, and then we're going to go straight into some Python coding. The next topic we're going to talk about is variables. So variables, you guys might be familiar with variables already. Like when you think about math, if you have x is equal to 5, x is equal to 5. And then you want to find y is equal to 2x minus 1. Pretty much second nature for a lot of you guys, especially because you have some background in math. You would plug in the x is equal to 5 into your equation where that x value is, and then you could solve for y. Variables in Python are very similar to that as well. The only difference is going to be the implications of this equal sign, and I'll be getting to that in just a second. Let's do a couple exercises with this as well though. I have x is equal to 4, and then y is equal to x minus 4. When we print y, what exactly will print out? Perfect, it's going to be 0. When we have x is equal to 4, we could plug this straight into the equation. So we have 4 minus 4, y would then be equal to 0, and then you would just print out 0. The next one, x is equal to hello. If I print out x, what should print out? Right, hello. So once again, through substitution, when we're trying to print out x, we're not literally trying to print out the letter x. Instead, we're printing out whatever is being stored inside of that variable. The value of x is hello. So it'll print out hello. Hello. Sorry, I'm trying. And finally, this last one. This one's a little bit trickier. We have x is equal to 4 and y is equal to 5. Then we do x is equal to y. When we print x and print y, what would print out? Very good, 5 and 5. So originally x is equal to 4, then and y is equal to 5. When we do this right here, x is equal to y, that means we substitute this right here to the right-hand side. So x is equal to 5. It's important that you in the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the equal sign. The left-hand side is what you are assigning to. The right-hand side is what you are assigning. Never substitute into the left-hand side because you're trying to assign a value to that variable. Always substitute things on the right-hand side because you're trying to calculate a value and then store it to the variable on the left-hand side. So that's the reason why it'll print out 5 and 5, and it won't print out like 5, 4, or anything different from what we have. When it comes to variables, however, there are naming rules. You can't just name a variable whatever you want to. I wish we could, but unfortunately you cannot. So let's talk about the naming rules of Python. First off, you want to give variables descriptive names. That way you know exactly what the variable is supposed to be doing when you look at your code. So don't give it random names like LOL or hi or anything that has no meaning. If LOL stands for something that you are able to recognize and has some kind of significance when you're running your code, then feel free to use LOL. But other than that, you want to, for example, if you're trying to count something, then maybe call a variable count. In Python, you can only have letters, numbers, and underscores in variable names. So my variable exclamation line are all unacceptable symbols in Python as well. You could use numbers, underscores are also okay. So just remember that. But when you are creating a variable, it must start with a letter or an underscore. So you cannot start a variable with a number. It always is a letter or underscore. So notice that this starts with an M, this starts with an underscore, this starts with a C, this starts with an S. Those are all okay. But if I had instead put like a 1 at the very front, then that doesn't work in Python. So, oh, right there, cannot start with a number. So because you cannot start with a number, by doing something like this, you're going to get an error. And finally, we have these last two. So variables are case sensitive, meaning if you have a variable num that starts with a capital N, and then another variable num that starts with a lowercase n, these two are considered two different variables. So be careful when you do that. Make sure that you're consistent. If you want to use num for one thing only, make sure all of the nums are either uppercase or start with the lowercase. And do not use the reserved words. That has a special meaning reserved in Python already. You cannot use as a variable. And with all of this being said, let's go ahead and do some, go to Python and do some practice. Without the quotation marks, it looks like a variable, which is the reason why it's important to have quotation marks in there. Without it, it just looks like a word that could potentially be a variable. So to differentiate it and just say, hey, this is a value that I want you to print out, we are going to put in the quotation marks. So now when you run this, now that we put it back in, it should work again. What if I have x is equal to 5, and then I print out x? It's going to print out hello world and then 5. Because I had defined x is equal to 5 here, when it goes here, it understands. Oh, you want me to print out the value that's associated with x. Before, when I just had hello and then world without the quotation marks, it was unable to know what hello was because it was looking for a variable that hopefully you had already defined. But in this case, there's nothing defined for hello. Here, however, x, the variable, is defined and assigned a value of 5. Which is why when you print x, it will print the value of x. So the value that's assigned to x. Going even further with this, what if I have a string that's assigned, and this string is going to be goodbye. We're just playing around with this just to see the features. If I want to print, oopsies, print y, what will print out now? What should print out when I have print y? Goodbye, right? So we have hello world, 5, and then the goodbye. What if I want to print two things though? So I want to print hello world, and I also want to print goodbye. We have a couple of options here. So I'm going to show you both of them. So let's say I want to print hello world first. Hello world. and then I also want to print out goodbye, I could put a plus sign like this. That means it'll combine the two strings together, hello world, and then whatever is being stored in Y, combine it together and then print it out. So if you see what I have here, you could see hello world and then the goodbye. This combines the two strings and then prints it out. So the plus sign is normally used for arithmetic when you add two numbers, for example, but by doing a plus sign with two strings, then you're able to combine the two strings, like one after another, attach the two, and then it'll print because you use the print function. The other alternative, the other alternative is separate them with a comma. So print hello world, comma, and then the Y. So by saving this and then running it, you can see, oops, I lost an exclamation mark here. So you can see this printing out. Does anyone notice something different between the two print statements I had just done? Right, there is a space. By using a comma, a space will automatically be used to separate the two values. If you're using a plus sign, it'll combine it as it is. So if I wanted a space after hello world, I have to manually insert that space. So now if I run it like so, you can see that space is in there compared to before where there was no space. So by adding the two things together, it combines it as it is. By using a comma to separate the two when you're printing it, it'll add the space in there for you automatically. Which brings us to an important topic. What if I want to print out a number and a string? So let's say I want to print out goodbye 5. So I could print out Y, which is goodbye, and then I could print out the value 5, which is X. So if I try this, I get an error. So notice, we did exactly the same thing as what we did before. Like we tried to append one thing after another by using a space or using a plus sign. But the issue with what we're trying to do here, when we're trying to add two things, one of the variables is a string. The other one is an integer. So when we try to add two different data types, you're going to get an error. So what do? We could convert the integer into a string. So we're going to convert it into a string by literally making it into a string. str and then x. By doing this, it'll take x, which is currently an integer, and change it into a string. Then it'll print it out for you because y was a string, now x has become a string. If you do a string plus a string, it should work kind of like how it worked up here. So if I go ahead and print this out now, I still have this. I'm going to comment this out now. So don't do this. This is bad. You can see that goodbye 5 is printed out now. No errors, but it works out fine. Let's say I want to put a space in between them. Before, it wasn't that big of an issue because when we did hello world, there was already quotations there. Here, there's nothing. So we had to manually insert it by adding that space with the quotation marks. So y plus the space inside the quotation marks plus, and then the string, the new string that we made through x. So you can append as many things as you want within a string. You can have so many, you can have plus sign after plus sign after plus sign after plus sign, and that will work out perfectly fine as long as you have the right amount of plus signs and your quotation marks match up. So running this, you can see that goodbye 5 is printing out perfectly fine. Y is the goodbye plus the space and then the 5, which is from the string. You could still use the comma form that we did before, but what's so nice and convenient about the comma is that it's okay for things to be different data types. So for example, print y, comma, oopsies, y, comma, x. So if I save it and print it this time, you can see that it does the goodbye 5 without me having to, I didn't have to manipulate anything. I didn't have to add in a space. Python, because it's separated with a comma, is able to understand that you're printing out 2 different things, even if they're 2 different data types. However, when you use a plus sign, it's more of like you trying to combine the 2 things first, so do some kind of operation on it, and then print it out. So there's advantages to using the plus sign, and there's advantages to using the comma. It's up to you. Like, as you practice, you'll begin to learn and understand which situation calls for whichever method. Both of them will work, however. Okay. Which brings me now to, I'm going to comment all of this out. That way a whole bunch of stuff isn't printing. Whoops. Control. Was it command? I don't remember how to do this. It's fine. I'll do this. Okay. Which brings us to our next major topic, which is getting user input. How do you interact with the user? Because normally, whatever you do on a computer, whether it's like a game or you're just using some kind of software, it's not the computer just working on its own. The user's interacting with the system. They're clicking buttons, they're typing things out, and the computer will respond to it. So that's the first thing we're going to be doing now, getting user input. So to get user input, we use an input function. It's input, and then we have the parentheses. What you put inside the parentheses is what you want to print, stuff prints to get, or to prompt the user. So let's do like a very quick example. Let's say x is equal to input. Give me, just type anything, I guess. Type anything. So if I save it, and then just, you can see that type anything shows up, and then it's waiting for me to actually type something, and then press enter. So input is the function name. Whatever you put inside the quotation marks, which are inside the parentheses, will print out so the user can see, and then it'll prompt the user to do something. So you could leave any message you want there. So let's say I'm gonna just literally type in anything and press enter, and my program ends because there's nothing else. I literally have one line in my program right now. Let's say what we want to do with this is, let's just print X. Because what should happen is whenever I get an input value from, or whenever I get an input value from the user, it'll be stored into X. So in this case, I typed out JGRIE. That is what is being stored in X at that moment. But if I were to run this again, type anything, whatever I type will be stored into the variable X, and then it will be printed out in the next line. So if I type anything, and you can see in the following line after, it does indeed print out. So let's try to do some, let's make a calculator. So instead of just saying type anything, we're gonna ask, give me a number. And now this time we're gonna ask, give me another number. If I print out X plus Y, what should happen? So let's say, for example, I run this. It says give me a number, I type in -3, and another number, I say 9. As soon as I press enter, what should print? Not both numbers. It'll print out the sum of the numbers. Actually, timeout. I lied. You're right. It's going to print out both numbers, actually. Sorry, I jumped the gun. It's going to print out both numbers, -3 and 9. The reason being is because X and Y, or input will get the string of the two numbers, or get the string of the input. So when I typed in -3, it's actually the string. If I type in 9, that's also the string. So what we need to do is take our input and convert it into like an integer or a float before we go ahead and do the math. Because what we want to do, actually, like I said, we want to do a calculator. So we have to convert it into numbers. If you want to do actual math with the input, convert it to the correct data type. Does that make sense? I know this is a little bit like a big jump actually from what we were doing before, so I just want to make sure everyone's understanding what the issue was here. So input will normally get the string instead of the actual number that's being input. So because it's getting text input, it's a string. That's pretty much like the overarch, like that's the issue. So because we want to change it into a number, like for example, we want to change it into like an integer or a float. So let's do a float to maintain flexibility, because if we change it to an integer, then that would give you a whole number, even if you type in a decimal. So we'll do a float like this. So what happens here it says, oopsies. Let's use this one. It'll run this first, give me a number, and then when it gets that string, then it'll convert it into a float. If we do the same thing for the other line, hold on a second, there we go. Same thing for the other line right here, then we will get the numbers counterpart of what the string was. So this time, if I do -3 and 9, it adds a 2 together and it gives me 6.0. 6.0 because it was a float. If we had changed it instead to an int, which remember int means whole number, and I ran this with -3 and 9, notice that we just get regular 6 because it was an integer, a whole number with no decimals. Any questions so far? Is my screen cutting out or is it still really laggy? Okay. What if I do print x minus y? What should this do? Oopsies. What should this do? So this one right here added the two numbers. This one right here, what should it do? It'll literally subtract the two numbers. So subtract the two numbers. What if I want to print? I wonder if you guys know what this symbol is. Do you guys know what this symbol is? Very good, multiply. It'll multiply the two numbers. How about this? Very good, it'll divide the two numbers. Specifically in the order, so x and then divided by y. So if x was 4 and y was 2, it would be 4 divided by 2. Same thing with the subtraction, it just goes in the same order that you normally would. What if I have, this one might be a different one that you guys might not recognize. X and then asterisk, asterisk, y. Does anyone know? Very good, it is the exponent. Exponent, or like the power. So do not use this. Do not do x to the y power. That's it's not this caret. I know it's like for calculators you normally use that caret, but it's not that caret in Python. How about this one? This one's a tricky one. I feel like many of, or unless you have prior Python experience, you might not have ever seen this before. This is what we call a floor division. So a floor division, what it'll do is divide the two numbers and then floor it, meaning round down, always round down. Divides the two numbers and rounds down. Rounds down to the nearest integer. Always rounds down. So if I had 19.999999, that's my quotient, it'll just become 19. It's actually a very handy tool. You might not be using it like a whole lot, but you definitely can use it. Let's go ahead and in here, we're just gonna print out what we wanted, or instead of just printing out because if we just run this as we have it, we have -3 and then 9, it'll just print out like this, which is nice and all, but it's not exactly what we, like a nice looking calculator would do, because 6 has no meaning, 12 has no meaning, just looking at what's printed out. So what we're gonna do instead is make it so that it prints out exactly what has happened. So instead of just printing out x plus y, we want to print out the number x plus the number y is equal to 6. So I'll get you started, and then I'll give you guys like 2 minutes to try this on your own, like finish the rest. So I wanted to print out x plus, and then the y, and then equals x plus y. So if I run it, -3 and 9, you can see that it prints like this instead. -3 plus 9 is equal to 6. There is another way to do it, and I'll show you that way as well. And then you could kind of maybe like mix it up, try both of them to do the rest, or you could just focus on one method, perfectly fine. So the other way, we talked about the 2 methods. The first one was using the pluses, like the addition signs throughout, and converting whatever is a string or what is not a string into a string itself, which is gonna be a lot of these because most of these are not strings. Even this right here is not a string. This one was definitely the easier method in my opinion, because x, which was a number, would print out, and then the plus sign would print out, and then the value for y would print out, and then the equal sign would print out, and then the x plus y will print out. Here, when we try to do it, if we just do x and then plus, and then the minus sign, and then plus the y, plus the equal sign, plus x minus y, you're gonna get a lot of errors because you have x, which is a number, y, which is also a number, and x minus y, which is also a number, being added to strings here. Remember, you cannot add different data types together. You can't alter, or you can't manipulate 2 data types together at all, actually. So we have to convert all of our non-string elements in this statement into a string. Starting from here, str of x, str of y, and str of x minus y. So a little bit more work, but this should work as well. Did I not save this? Give me a number. Oh, just kidding. Hold on. Negative, what is it? -3 and then 9. So you can see this right here, it printed like this. If you wanted to manually add the spaces in, you could add them in right here. I'm just gonna do that because I personally like a little bit more spacing. That way it's easier for me to read. So if I do -3 and 9, it will look like this. Right now it's 3:26, so I'll give you guys like, because we're almost out of time, I'll give you like a minute and a half to go through these and do as much as you can. There's 4 left.